Ralph Blumenthal of the New York Times said, "If it's in Texas, then the Texas Country Reporter has seen it, photographed it, and talked about it." 4 Texas governors, Ann Richards, George W. Bush, Rick Perry, and Greg Abbott, have called him Texas Ambassador of Tourism, telling the stories of our state and its people. The great storyteller Charles Kuralt said, "Bob learned to tell stories listening to the old-timers who could spin a yarn like no others." And now, after 52 years of producing and hosting Texas Country Reporter, Bob is off on yet another adventure, traveling all over America, gathering stories for his national radio show and podcast. I think it's all safe to say that we're very jealous that he has this job, because he literally does have the best job in Texas. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to extend a great Kaufman welcome to Mr. Bob Phillips.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good to be here with you today. As Stewart said, in fact, I'm going to sit down here because I'm old. Actually, that's the mic I'm supposed to be using. There's a reason, but you know. So as Stewart was telling you, I am the now former host of TCR, Texas Country Reporter. Very quickly, I'll just tell you, after doing it I started that show in 1972. After doing it for 52 seasons, I kind of woke up one day and said, maybe it's time to do something else. And so sold the company, and now we were off. So if you're wondering why I am up here talking to you, and it's because at the ripe old age of 18, going back to 1970, and a freshman in college, I went to work at the CBS affiliate in Dallas, which is KDFW, which is now the Fox affiliate, as a news cameraman. That was my first job there, was to go out and be the one who was shooting. Back then we were on film before the videotape thing hit many years later. And over the next several years, I wore a lot of hats. I became a reporter, producer, director, assignments editor, news anchor. Did all of those for 13 years. I got to travel with the Dallas Cowboys as a sports photographer. I was on the sidelines of every Dallas Cowboys game played from September of 1970 all the way through the Super Bowl of 1983. Did 3 Super Bowls during that time. Did a lot of special assignments working for NFL Films during that time. One of the little sidelights of that is that at a certain point, working for NFL Films was, when I started, was kind of new, and by the time I left doing that after my 3rd Super Bowl, they offered me a full-time job shooting for NFL Films, and that's the job that I always look back and go, should I have taken that one? But I always come up with the fact that I spent 52 years hosting a television show that I created, and when I look back on it and all of those years, I think, no, I did the right thing, because I can't remember a time when I was unhappy. There were times where I might not have been as happy as I would like to have been for what various reasons that we all encounter at work. I had somebody asked me one time, why did you stay in the same job for so long? When I was very new and still 18 or 19, I remember somebody that I thought had a wonderful job at the TV station where I was working left to go somewhere else. And I asked my boss, why is he leaving? Because I couldn't imagine, you work so hard to get there and then he leaves. And he said, let me give you a piece of advice, which I've carried with me and have imparted to younger people over the years. He said, never be running from something so hard and fast that you forget to look at where you are running to. And I figured out what he meant, because the job that particular guy went to lasted about a year, and then he got fired and ended up doing something totally different with his life. So, one of those little things that, So over the years, you know, I've been the person that sometimes people do a double take and think, I know that guy from somewhere, but nobody ever remembered my name, at least the first half of my career. They just remembered this, I've seen that guy somewhere, so I was mistaken for the weatherman a lot. Oh yeah, you do the weather on, you know, and they wouldn't even get the channel right, you know. It'd be, you know, there was a guy that was a big time, he was a big time network guy named Stone Phillips that did 2020. And Stone's family was actually from Waxahachie, Texas. And because of the name similar, we were both Phillipses, I would have a lot of people say, oh, you're Stone Phillips. And I said, no, I'm Bob Phillips. Stone Phillips does 2020. Well, I met Stone one time and I said, hey, Stone, I have people come up and ask me, if I'm you, does that happen to you? Do people say, are you Bob Phillips? And he went, no. Oh. So anyway, that little weekly television show, eventually in 2000, I syndicated it from being just a Dallas-Fort Worth area show back in 1986. In 2000, syndicated again nationwide. And so it was carried all over North America starting in 2000. And I could never believe that people would watch this what started out as this little local half-hour show, and still was, but you know, about Texas when they lived in Seattle or Manhattan or somewhere, but they did. And we frequently got emails from people who watched other places, always wondered, would they have watched if it had been about Iowa? I don't know. I mean, nothing against Iowa, but I think you'd run out of stories. Texas offered us a lot of stories. And so we sold the show 3 years ago this month, as a matter of fact. 3 years ago this month, we sold the show, but we promised that we would stay on for a couple of years through season 52, which just ended this last August 31st. And then a new host was selected and is now carrying on with the show. That show, by the way, became the longest running non-network owned, so it wasn't owned by CBS, NBC, ABC, or Fox, non-network owned syndicated program in the history of American television. And it started in 1972 in Dallas. Can you believe that? All right, so we're here to talk about small business and businesses and blah, 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 and all of that. And just this morning, I do this thing every morning. Anybody in here subscribe to 1440? If you haven't, you need to Google it. You get 1440. It's basically a real quick news wrap up, and you can look and see what's going on. Why 1440? It's approximately the year that the printing press was invented, and so that's where they came up with the name. But it's a news wrap up. So I'm reading just this morning this interesting story that kind of it kind of approached what we're going to talk about here for the next few minutes. And it was this little riff that's going on between Baker Mayfield and Tom Brady. Baker Mayfield, for those of you who aren't football people, is the current quarterback of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tom Brady, of course, spent all of these years in New England with the Patriots, is, you know, usually referred to as the GOAT, the greatest of all times, because even being a Dallas fan like I am, I have to admit that he's the greatest quarterback of all time. 7 Super Bowl rings, including his last one. After he left the Patriots, he moves to Tampa Bay, becomes quarterback there. In his first year, they win the Super Bowl, okay? Kind of made his point, you know. Hey guys, without saying it, he got to say, it wasn't the coach, it wasn't the team, it was me. Because he goes to a completely different team, you know, and still wins the Super Bowl. So apparently, sometime here in the last few days, Baker Mayfield says to a group of people where this was publicized, yeah, they wanted to bring me into Tampa Bay because they wanted me to restore the fun to the team. And, you know, because a lot of the players weren't having a really good time and they weren't experiencing the level of satisfaction with playing at Tampa Bay before I was here. Tom Brady, who's now, a big-time color commentator, and he is on national TV the other day, and they asked him to comment on Baker's comment, and he says, "Wow, I didn't know we were supposed to be having fun. I thought that satisfaction could be attained by getting a Super Bowl ring." This wasn't a daycare center. If I wanted to have fun, I'd take my kids and go to Disneyland. Okay, so that was Tom Brady's reply to the fact that it wasn't much fun playing with Tom Brady, because he takes what he does very seriously. Well, that's a little bit of what we're going to get into here in just the next few minutes. One of the reasons that I wanted to do this is because talking about what people do to make a living has become a staple of my storytelling over the years. In fact, when I first approached my bosses at KDFW TV in Dallas back in the early 70s with the idea for a new TV show, they of course wanted to know exactly what this new program would be about, which is a pretty good question for you to be asked. And I told them it would be about anybody and everybody, the everyday women and men that you see on the street and how they live their lives. Simple as that. That's what it was supposed to be when we first got started. That was probably, the truth is, I was flying by the seat of my pants and I had no idea what I was going to do with this TV show. I just wanted to do a TV show about people. So, I finagled my way into getting them to say yes. What I told them about doing it about anybody and how they live their lives was probably based on something that I heard over and over and over again. I had a mother who was very involved in my life and the way I was thinking. I often tell people that she didn't raise me, she programmed me. And I still wake up and feel some of that programming today, but it wasn't a bad thing, mostly. She would say to me, "Son, there are a lot of ways to live a life," which is, think about that. There are a lot of ways to live a life. The key is finding the way that works best for you. And now, I don't think that she ever thought that what would work best for me was to grow up and be a storyteller. That's not exactly what people would normally call a real job, which is what I think she figured out, that I was going to find one of these, the 9-to-5 really solid job. Media is not known as that, although it worked for me for all of these years. By the way, I'll tell you this, storytelling is an ancient profession. People have been doing it for hundreds of years. If you go back to ancient Rome, people would gather together in a coliseum or some public place where everybody could hear this guy, and a guy would come in and he would shout out the news of the day to all of the people that were there. And the people paid, they gave him a coin in order to tell them what's going on, because think about it. This is way before we had printing presses, and of course we didn't have any other kind of way to disseminate information. So it was on these storytellers to come and tell them, hey, this went over in Marathon, or this went over in, whatever. This is what's going on. So that to keep people informed. You know what the coin was that people gave to the storyteller? It was called a gazette. The very reason that there are so many newspapers that are called the such and such Gazette. It's named after, that's one of the jobs of being a storyteller, is to impart useless information like that I just gave to you just now. So, I'll do that from time to time. Before I get off on any more useless stories, let me introduce you to somebody who does this incredible job, finally, somebody did it, of keeping me on track. Please say hello to the love of my life, my wife, the former co-host of Texas Country Reporter, and now co-host of our new national radio show and podcast, On the Road with Kelli and Bob, or Blob, either way. Say hello to Kelli Phillips.
Hi. Wow, much different view up here than it is over there.
That's because you were looking at fajitas.
I was, and they were excellent.
Those were really good fajitas.
Yes.
Great fajitas, by the way, guys.
Yes. Well, like Bob told you about his career, I'll kind of give you a brief synopsis of my career.
Brief? Really? Oh, no, go ahead. Don't let
I'm
me
younger
stop.
than you, so mine is shorter.
Et tu, Brute? I mean, really?
This is what we live with. Look, we went from living apart for 10 years, 5 hours apart. We only saw each other on the weekends.
Can we explain why that was? Because
Yes, well,
I mean, it wasn't that she was mad at me. I mean, she
No.
may have been, but that wasn't what it really was.
no, but I was doing the news in Beaumont, Texas. Bob was based in Dallas. Of course, mine was, the news is the news is the news. You've got the morning, the noon, the 5, the 6, the 10, Monday through Friday. So I was stuck.
And I worked whenever I felt like it.
Yeah, and he gallivanted. So anyway, that's why we lived apart for so long. And anyway, I got started in television about the age of 14. I started doing commercials. At 18, I was the youngest co-host of Evening Magazine in San Antonio. And
Which was a nationwide show, but you
which
were the...
lasted about that long. Then I got
actually, it didn't. You happened to come in at the end, but it was
Yes.
on for like 15 years. so,
Yes.
yeah.
Did radio, then got back into television, did the news thing, and once I started reporting on our kids' friends getting in jail, being arrested, being shot, doing drugs, that was about the time
their
Bob...
DUIs,
Yeah,
yeah,
that
all
was
of
about the time that Bob went, you know what, I've got a better job idea for you. Why don't you join me? And this is a sane way to make a living and not have to live with all of this negative news that you're reporting on.
I had been through the same thing years earlier where I was doing the news, and one day I woke up and went, I've had enough of this.
It really
This-
wears on you.
You take it home with you.
Yeah,
really
you don't
do, so.
realize how much you do take home. So about 10 years ago, I left the news business, joined Bob on TCR, and have never looked back. And I tell you what, we are having the time of our lives.
Yes, we are. We still are at this point. By the way, as soon as I don't know what this says about me. I'd done the show for 40 years by myself, and Kelly comes in and our ratings spiked and went up. So I'm not sure what,
I think you're just making that up.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, it's the truth. I mean, all right. So, can I get off on another one of my stories that
Okay,
may be?
but as long as I can rein you back in.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know this is going to seem to be going nowhere, but I promise you that it's going to pay off in the end. When I was growing up, I knew an old guy named Leon, and Leon ran a little service station near downtown Dallas, which was not far from where I grew up, the neighborhood. I grew up in Old East Dallas. Went to Bryan Adams High School, blah, blah, blah. So Leon was a great guy. I liked him a lot. And he talked often about the fact that running a service station was not what he was supposed to be doing with his life. In fact, he insisted to me over and over again when I was growing up that I'm supposed to be a farmer, because that's what he had started off doing in a little town called Collinsville, Texas. And then he was, to make a living, he was kind of forced to give up the farming business right after World War II because he'd lost his left arm in an accident. It was very difficult for him. He was farming by himself, very difficult, with mules and a plow.
Yikes.
Tried doing that with one hand. So Leon, had to give up farming, but he also had to make a living. So he was running that service station to take care of his family. Not that he didn't like running the service station. I think that he did, but it wasn't his calling. And he said one day, it won't be long, and I'm going to get back to farming. Now we got tractors and all this kind of stuff, and so I'm going to be able to get back to farming. And he said that pretty much his whole life. But he stayed at that job running that service station for most of his life, and he finally retired back to a little piece of dirt near where he grew up, and planned to raise a few crops and sell them at the local farmer's market. But by that time, farming had changed so much, and it just wasn't the same as it was when he was a kid. And so Leon's dream of returning to farming never became a reality. And the thought of that kind of made me sad for him, because I would think this guy, this is something he loved, but he wasn't able to do it for a job. He was doing a job that brought in money.
To take care of his family.
To take care of his family. And I always wondered did Leon do the right thing by sacrificing his dream to take care of his family and do that? Could he maybe not have figured out a way to do this? I don't know, because he wanted to be a farmer so bad. I think a lot of us wonder that about our own lives. Just like I told you, I wondered from time to time, should I have taken that job with NFL Films? Probably wouldn't have lasted as long, I'm sure, but sure had a lot of fun while I was doing it. So I think a lot of us wonder about that, because most of us, I think, are brought up to be productive members of society. You know, your job is to go to school, get an education, and then and get a job. After you're done with the education part, you get a job and you make a living. And if you want to, you raise a family, you do all of those things. So that scenario, should I follow the money or should I follow my dream? That eventually somehow crept into the TV show that I started and became a recurring theme of that. We didn't exactly introduce it that way. We would just tell you stories about somebody who was doing something that they really loved, and that's how they were making a living, or somebody who was making a living over here and suddenly they just quit doing it to pursue something that they really loved. Or we might even tell you a story about somebody that wished that he was doing such and such.
So when are you going to tell them who Leon really is?
So how do I know all this about Leon? Well, because Leon was Leon Phillips, my dad. And my brother and I and our mom were the very reasons that he quit the uncertain business of farming and got that, as our mom said, real job to take care of us. So that's something that, you kind of carry around, because my brother and I talk frequently about, wow, wouldn't it have been great if Dad could have stayed on the farm, because that's where his heart was on the farm. But he made that sacrifice to take care of us.
Yeah, and while Bob's mom and dad were doing whatever they could to bring in enough money to put food on the table, I was raised in a family. My parents didn't have traditional jobs. My parents were, I guess they grew up in the hippie age, okay? We referred to them as...
Nothing wrong with that.
No, as hippie artists, though. And I can never remember growing up where either one of my parents really had one of those standard jobs where you're paying into Social Security, but they were doing what they loved. And we grew up, I always had a parent home with me. Because my parents didn't have to go to work, or they opted not to. Now, they were following their dream, and we didn't have money saved up to do the extra things, but it was never anything where I felt like we were missing out on something.
You never went hungry.
No, we never went hungry, and I think that's where both of us get that love of following your dream, following your passion, and
yeah. So really what we're coming around down to here is, what's the right answer here?
Yeah.
Follow the money or follow your dreams? Well, if you're lucky, like I have been, and I'm the most, like Stewart said, I've got the best job in the world and always have had. And I don't know what I did that God gave me this job, but somehow I ended up with it, and I have to say I've loved my life because of it, and because of a lot of things. But if you're lucky like me, those two things are the same thing. But let's be honest here. Truth is, not all of us are that fortunate. I just happened to hit something that was my calling. Some of us live to work, while others of us work to live. And I think that I've always thought that, shouldn't there be a happy medium in that? Shouldn't there be a way that you can do it? I hadn't been doing my TV show very long when I ran into a guy in downtown Dallas who told me he had found that happy medium. He was probably the first of those kinds of stories that
that's
I
probably
ever did.
when this whole thing started, and you
Was
finally...
with this guy.
Yeah, when you finally...
His name was Dan, and he was standing on the street How many people here realize that there's an underground part of downtown Dallas? It used to be very vibrant, and there were restaurants down there, and there were all kinds of things in the underground. Now it's kind of boarded up, a lot of it, and there's only little parts of it. But back then, it was huge. You could go from anywhere under Dallas. On a rainy day, everybody went down there to eat, because you didn't have to get out and into it. But this guy's name was Dan. He was right there at the entrance to one of the entrances to the underground, standing next to a popcorn machine on wheels selling bags of popcorn to people. He would yell, "Popcorn, popcorn, get your popcorn here. It'll make your day happy." That's what I would, and I stood there and I watched Dan, dressed in a red and white striped jacket, matching hat. He looked like a candy cane. And if anybody seemed to be happy doing what they were doing for a living, it had to be Dan. So, of course, I had to talk to him and find out the backstory on how he came to be selling popcorn on the street in downtown Dallas. Come to find out, Dan says that he was some kind of executive with Texas Instruments. This is in the 1970s. And this is when the whole computer thing is really starting to boom. And Texas Instruments was a major player. And this guy was some sort of executive where he says, I made a really good salary. But he said he realized that he wasn't in love with that job. He said, I worked to live. One day he was sitting at a movie with his wife. They're having one of those big tubs of popcorn. They're watching a movie they like, drinking a Coke with it.
They're happy.
They're happy, and they're having a happy moment, and he thinks, why is it that people don't eat popcorn except when they go to the movies or maybe to a sporting event? Maybe they cook a bag, of popcorn or I guess back then it would have been a Jiffy Pop.
Jiffy Pop on the stove, yeah.
Half these people don't know what Jiffy Pop is.
I know.
Okay.
Microwave popcorn, same thing, but
So he wondered, why don't they do that? And I wonder, what would people do if they go to lunch or they go out on their morning break or afternoon break and they can buy a bag of popcorn while they're in the middle of their job? I'm going to do that. He quits the job at Texas Instruments, just quits, buys a popcorn machine, which, this sounds like lunacy. And he goes down there and he's standing there selling the popcorn. And I said, well, how's it work out? And he goes, I'm happier than I've ever been in my life. And Bob, I think that these people love having this popcorn available because while I'm not making what I was at Texas Instruments, I sure do make enough to live my life. And I'm pretty happy. And I said, are you glad you did this? And he goes, I've never looked back. No. So Dan the popcorn man was down there for over 20 years. And during the state fair, he would also had a thing where he sold popcorn at the state fair for a while. I mean, the guy made a living. So,
and this was a story that Bob decided to do on the television show.
Yeah.
And Dan's business, get this, it grew. Because
publicity is a good thing.
Positive publicity.
Sometimes even negative publicity.
Well, yeah, we don't want to go there.
Right.
But they kind of noticed a side effect to that story. Folks started telling Bob about other people who were following in the popcorn man's footsteps. They were leaving their jobs to pursue a dream. And that kind of concerned you a little bit.
Yeah, it did. Because Dan the popcorn man gave up his job and was successful, I figured, well, that's kind of a fluke. I mean, you don't just suddenly walk out of your job and start pursuing. Maybe you pursue that dream a little bit at night or on the weekends. Or,
have some money in the bank.
There are other ways to find out if this is going to work.
Yeah.
And still, though, I have to admit, ego-wise, there was a certain satisfaction to seeing that we did this story on our little weekly TV show, and it influenced a lot of people that much. I was overjoyed but worried.
Yeah, but it turns out over the past 50 years, we have run across a lot of people who, like Bob's mom suggested long ago, have come to realize that there are a lot of ways to live life. Mm-hmm. You can follow the money, or you can follow your dreams. Or, if you work it right, you can do both. And it seemed that most of them were taking a sensible approach to their lives rather than just going off willy-nilly and, as you say that I do a lot, jumping off a cliff. doing things willy-nilly without thinking things through.
I
Totally.
don't know if you think she does. She is a cliff jumper, by the way. I mean, just let's do this, boom, and I'm going, ooh, let's
Let's
figure
think about
out
all
all of
these
this
things.
first. So
I'm just ready to do it.
practical. Okay, so here's what we've learned. What we have learned by meeting all of these people over the years that have either done this or talked to us about wanting to do this. For one, it's okay to chase the money. It's okay. It's like I said, it's what we're brought up to do. Become productive members of society. If you're lucky, you might be living the dream and chasing the money all at the same time. But if you're not, maybe you can make room for both of those things in your life. We meet lots of people who like what they're doing to make a living, but who find time to maybe pursue a hobby or a side hustle or whatever it is that speaks to them. Over here, I'm taking care of my obligations. Over here, I'm taking care of my soul, is what it comes down to. Those things, we believe, can coexist. Or maybe what the answer to that is if you don't feel like if you're in this job that you don't hate, I mean, let's face it, a lot of people hate their jobs, but you don't necessarily hate it, but you've always wondered, what if I could do such and such? Maybe it's as simple as finding a new attitude about that job that that you think you're a little tired of. I'm a good example of that. At first, when I first started the TV show, I wanted to do it, folks, because it was fun. I was a kid. I was still a teenager when I started it. I mean, I grew up on television, and to me, this will be fun, and so I was happy with that. But somewhere along the line, after a while, I came to believe that this thing that had just kind of gotten legs of its own had become important, or maybe it was always important, and it just took a while for me to realize that it was important. It was important to a lot of people who watched it. It was important to me. It was important to the people we employed to do this. We all, we're a big family working together to do this thing that whether we announced it or not, and we didn't. We never announced it, but it had a message to it.
Yeah, and it fed our souls.
Yeah, that's
truly.
exactly right.
And over the years, I mean, we've met lots of people who reach a point in their lives where they found a new appreciation and a purpose for what they've been doing, or they just completely started a new life with a new job and even a new purpose. I'll go to a company that we did a story on called Love and Cookies. Oh. Now, if you don't love the name of that to begin with, there's something wrong with you.
Love and Cookies.
Love and Cookies.
Is that a great name or what?
So it's a mom right outside of Austin in Lakeway. And her son was going through some medical issues, and
Pretty major medical
They
issues.
were in and out of the hospital, and I mean, just really wearing on the entire family. And she asked her son one day, what will make you happy? What do you want? What do you want to do? Let's forget about all the medical stuff. What do you want to do? And the little boy looked at his mom and said, I just want to go home and make some cookies with you.
Ooh.
Make some cookies. So as a mom, she went home, she started making these cookies. These are incredible cookies, by the way. She ended up starting her own business. We ran into her at HEB's Quest for Texas Best, and
we happen to be the judges of that year's Quest for Texas Best competition. If you don't know about that, HEB, which is getting bigger and bigger in this part of the state.
Thank goodness.
They carry all of these Texas products, and there are all of these companies that have started that have been made. I mean, their lives have been made by HEB, accepting them into their stores. And we were the judges one year and got to pick the ones who were going to be in the store that
So anyway, she presented at the HEB Quest for Texas Best cookies straight out of the oven. And I mean, these are big, massive cookies with a glass of milk, because you got to have a glass of milk. So what she does is she makes cookie balls They're frozen. You can buy them at H-E-B, but if sometimes you just have a hankering, I just want a cookie. I don't want to have to make 2 dozen. I don't want to have to make a whole big thing. She freezes the cookie balls, and you take them out one at a time and heat them up, and you can have a hot cookie anytime you want.
They're like this big, though. Okay, they're like this tall, and they're like this. So I can have one cookie and be. By the way, guess who got the recipe from her? And we have cookie balls in our freezer all the time.
Yes.
So,
But anyway, she's following her dream. This is something that she started with her son because her son going through all of this medical stuff was really wearing on the entire family. She goes home, makes cookies, and then they started inventing this thing. And it grew and it grew and it grew. And she finally found her purpose in life.
she's very, very happy, and so is the little boy and the whole family. And
Yeah, and he's doing
employing a lot
great,
of
by the
people.
way.
And they're in every H-E-B in the state of Texas now.
And since we're getting H-E-B, go out and buy
Yeah,
some
go to
Love
an
It and
H-E-B
cookies.
and find
They're in the
Love It
freezer
cookies.
section. Can't go
You need
wrong.
to- So another that comes to mind is a story about a guy in Brenham, Texas, that I found about 10 years ago or so, and he was making a musical instrument called a zither. Has anybody ever seen one of these? It looks like a little guitar. The zither is actually mentioned in the Bible.
Bible, yeah.
We don't know if it was the same instrument, but that's what he calls it. And so I'd heard about this guy was making them in Brenham, Texas, and I thought, that's interesting. No, most people have never heard of this. I called him up, and he was a little bit hesitant at first about having us come visit him and do a story on his zither making. But he finally said yes. We went down, we did this, and after we did the story, his business really took off. Once again, publicity is a wonderful thing, especially for a new, unknown product. Yeah. Well, just recently, in October of this year, we were talking to him. If you don't know this, we've always done, for 27 years, we've done this one-day festival over in Waxahachie. And that was associated with the TV show we did. We were there this year, and he was there.
It's not associated with the TV show anymore.
Not anymore.
Okay.
And so well, that's because we're not doing the TV show anymore. Oh,
Right.
okay. Anyway.
We digress. Sorry.
So we were talking to him, and he goes, I got to tell y'all something. When you called me, I was about to pull the plug on my business because I wasn't making a living at it. As a matter of fact, you remember that little mini warehouse where I was making them? That was actually my bedroom, too. I was living in it. And I was like, seriously? And he goes, yeah. And he said, and I made myself a promise that I was going to, when you called, I may have sounded hesitant at first. And I said, I'm going to see if it changes things. And it did. And this guy, by the way, now makes all kinds of things. He makes the most beautiful guitar stands that you
can find at what?
Vince Gill has about 30 of them for
But you
one
can
for
find them at
every
Guitar Center, is that right?
Guitar Center, yeah.
Yeah.
And on his own website and all. Anyway, his business took off, and he said, I used to have a job that I absolutely hated doing, and I took off and started making these zithers, and I thought, that's not going to work. And you did the story, and luckily it picked up, and then other people picked it up and did stories about it, and the publicity has been a wonderful thing. And now, I am living my best life.
And he's no longer living in that warehouse. He actually has a really nice
Really
big
nice house now.
Yeah. Then there was a couple from New Orleans. In 2005, we all remember Hurricane Katrina, where the levees broke in New Orleans. They didn't have a house. Everything was gone. So they picked up and moved to Austin. That's on them. They picked Austin. But they decided, in Austin, there's not a lot of Creole food, which is what they came from in Louisiana. So they decided she had a praline recipe.
Not praline.
No.
Praline.
Praline. It's praline.
You go to
in
New
Louisiana.
Orleans, they're pralines.
Yes, not pralines. Incredible, but it grew from making those pralines and selling them at various events to then having a catering business where they specialize in Creole food and they deliver.
And by the way, they had never cooked for a living in their lives.
No.
They had a moving business. They moved your household goods when they were in New Orleans. But she always wanted to have that kind of business. When she was forced to come up with something new after moving here because they lost everything in Hurricane Katrina, she said, this is what I'm going to be. So, Nate, they run a successful cooking and catering business. You want to show the video on that real quick? We don't have sound. There we go. Okay. They may have gone to sleep on you.
We could try talking through this. This is where they're making, they're cutting vegetables. They're making a roux. Some technical issues.
Okay.
No problem.
You know what? We can move on without.
Okay.
You got it?
Fingers crossed.
I feel like we've seen that before.
And we're just basically telling y'all just a few of the stories that touch our hearts, you know, over the many years of doing the television show.
Yeah. Yeah. No problem.
No problem.
So basically, this is basically her telling us. Kelly was. I'll narrate what this was going to be. We went down to join them in their little kitchen where they were doing this, and they have. First of all, she said, "I won't sell you a praline. I don't care if you're from Texas and you call them pralines. We do not sell pralines." And Kelly says, "What are they?" She goes, "They're pralines."
Pralines.
Pralines, and that's the way we invented it. Not you guys. I don't know whether that's true or not. You know.
And she uses pecans, not pecans.
Or pecans. She uses
pecans.
Pecans, not
yes,
pecans.
Not
yes,
pecans.
Because she's from the South.
Exactly.
Yes. And their business has become a catering thing where you order from them and they deliver it to your door every Friday.
It's phenomenal.
And, and it's a phenomenal business. And she and her husband are the only two employees, along with a few part-timers, and have had a wonderful time.
It's all right. We can go on.
Yep. I'll tell you very quickly about one other story that is very similar. That comes to mind is going back. This goes all the way back to the mid '80s. I heard about this guy on Lake Buchanan that was near. It's kind of near Burnett, Texas. Not Burnett, Burnett. Like Dad Burnett. Burnett, Texas, and he had this huge party boat, and he would take all of his friends and family and all that. And this guy loved being out in nature, especially on that boat. And everybody wanted to go. All his friends and families wanted to go, but somebody suggested to him, it was very expensive for him to be taking them doing this, and he didn't have a great job at the time. They said, why don't you just start taking people on trips? So we had heard about this. We called him, and I think this was 1984.
The first
and
one,
so,
yeah.
gosh, a long time ago. And he said, yeah, come on down. So we go down there, and he takes us all over Lake Buchanan and up the Colorado River a little bit, which is some of the most beautiful area in the world. And it's where the American bald eagles come to spend the winter. They come out of Canada and Alaska and northern parts of this country, and they come down where it's a little bit cooler during the winter, and they spend a lot of them. Quite a few of them will spend the winter on Lake Buchanan for whatever reason. And so he called it the Vanishing Texas River Cruise. This guy has been making his living now. This is the 40th year since we did that story, and he started doing it full time also after we did the story. Everybody in the world has done a story on this by now, and he has spent his life. That guy was in his early 20s. He's now in his early 60s, and he's been making his living taking people on this beautiful scenic river cruise for all of these years. It's these kinds of stories that make us appreciate, what we get to do for a living, and that is telling other people's stories like this.
Yeah, and I think the message is not as simple as working to live or living to work. It's more about that happy medium, you know, you find something that you're passionate about, pursue it. If you can make a living at it, great. But if not,
Even if you
that's
can't,
okay.
if you can't make a living at it, of doing something that you're passionate about, my advice is do it anyway, if you can, if there's a way, because, you know, if you can do it at night, if you can do it on the weekend, if you can do it here and there, if you can, whatever it is, because trust me on this, there is nothing like pursuing something in life that makes you truly happy.
Yeah, and that's why we call these jobs that truly speak to the heart.
Yes, they do.
And you know what Bob started 52 years ago and did for 52 years. We sold that. We weren't ready to hang it up, and now we're following our dreams by doing a national radio show and podcast, and still the same types of stories.
We're doing these same stories, we're just doing them on radio and on podcasts.
And you can
depending on how you
find
want.
these type of people everywhere.
We're traveling the entire USA, doing these same stories now, which was always kind of a dream. you
Yeah.
know.
And we went
Trust
from
me, I've
having
been everywhere in
employees-
Texas many times.
Yeah. Well, and we went from having employees to now just relying on the two of us to do the radio show and podcast. So if you can find to make it work, do it. Follow the passion, because it's well worth it.
We're at the end of our time here. Is real quick, anybody have any kind of questions or comments that you, yes? Oh, great. Great. Thank you.
Mental Health Coalition for Women and Families Breaking the Silence.
We just did a story.
So, my question was, how do I get on the podcast? Who do I need to talk to?
I'm going to give you a card.
Thank
It's gonna
you.
tell you how to do that.
That's how you do it.
That's exactly how you
Oh,
do
yeah.
it. Don't be
But-
afraid to ask.
But-
I don't know what fear is. So
Good.
I don't live in it. So I don't, and there's some things I don't want to. So I'll be calling you yesterday.
Okay.
Yesterday.
By the way, we just did a story this past weekend. We did our show here locally. You find it on KRLD on Sunday afternoons at 2:00, and it's an hour long now, and it's 4 segments that are not related, except for this past weekend on Thanksgiving weekend this year. Every year we used to do it on the TV show. Now we do it on the radio show. One of our sponsors, Mueller. Once a year they give away one of their buildings, 4,000 square foot building, to a deserving nonprofit. This year it was in Poto, Oklahoma, to the Women's Crisis Services of LaFleur County up there, and that just aired this past weekend, an entire hour show.
Yeah, they're
you ought to
breaking
go on
the
and listen to
silence.
that if
Yeah.
you want to talk about breaking the silence. Listen,
Mental health matters, and it does.
listen
Thank you.
to the entire hour, and have some Kleenex by you if you.
Yeah,
Anybody
you'll need
else
it.
have any?
Yes,
Any
back
other-
in the back.
Number one, I'm in the back because I'm your biggest fan.
What was that?
She needed to be in the back because she's our biggest fan. She couldn't get too close.
Thank you so much.
Everything recorded, my life's been recorded, you don't have to expect the center for it. Have you ever done any stories
Have you ever done any stories here in
gosh, yes.
Kaufman?
First story I ever did was on your sheriff back in the 70s, a guy named Roy Brockaway. Some of you remember Roy. And it started with the theme. We see him walking across in the downtown area, and he's walking along. He didn't carry a gun for the longest time, so he reminded me of Andy Griffith back then. And so we started with the theme song to the Andy Griffith Show. That's how it started. That was the very first one ever in Kaufman, 1972 or 3, something like that, yeah. Somewhere in there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for having us today. We really enjoyed being